Praise be to Jesus Christ and welcome to Catholic Forum. I'm your host, Deacon Jim Thorndell. I'd like to welcome all those who are joining us on public TV and those who might be hearing us or joining us on podcast. Again, it's always our pleasure to be able to spend this time with you. This 30 minutes goes so quick, but it's really an understanding of bringing us all into a deeper understanding of who we are as Catholics. And many of us have been on different journeys in our Catholicism. And you know, it's really an understanding that God works in us at different times. And the journey can always be different for each individual. Some of us respond quicker to grace. Some of us take a little more time. We're just kind of taking our time to really jump back into our faith or back into our Catholic faith. But it's always in God's providence. It's always His time, and we have to come to that understanding that as we mature as men and women, Christian men and women, that God begins to work in our heart and bring us into a deeper understanding and a conviction of who Jesus is. You know, and there's nothing more powerful than someone who has maybe stepped away from the church for a while and then really begins to realize that the fullness of truth really resides in the Catholic Church. And God begins to work in the hearts in a much different way, in a more profound way, because when somebody is really seeking God in the fear of God, commitment, this awe that we have for God, He begins to infuse in them the gift of wisdom. And that wisdom begins to open their minds and it begins to open their hearts to the truth of the revealed Jesus and His revealed church. I'm privileged that I have such a person with me today who really has been on that journey. A man who has probably born, we're going to get into that, but really had left the Catholic Church for a while and really had an epiphany, you might say, that God is really in this church and with this church, and that Jesus is who He says He is, and that Jesus can really bring us into that understanding of His bride, the church. I want to greet a good friend of mine, Jeffrey York. Jeff, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Deacon.
Pleasure to have you here. Now, Jeff, you're one of our producers, and you're one of the cameramen, and you're a jack of all trades here at Catholic Forum.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful to have that. I mean, you know, could you have ever done this before your reversion?
No. I think I was gone away from the church for about a dozen plus years, and I didn't come back directly back into the Catholic Church, but I came back in through Promise Keepers.
Okay. Let's take it back a ways first.
Okay.
Let's take it back to, I'm not saying your early childhood, but were you raised Catholic?
Yep, born and raised Catholic.
Okay.
I share some kind of interesting dates. Born on Good Friday. I was baptized on Divine Mercy Sunday.
Wow.
Of course, Divine Mercy Sunday wasn't celebrated back then.
Exactly.
But, that was something I learned after I came back in. That was something that was now being celebrated.
Okay.
And so to go back and to do some reading of Sister Faustina and some studies on that.
Sure.
And just it's been really interesting to study all these people that have kind of had a hand in me coming back.
Yeah.
Came back on the feast day of St. Maria Goretti.
Were you a practicing Catholic in your younger years?
In my younger years, yeah. I went to church with my mom. My folks divorced when I was, I think, 10, 11 years old.
Okay.
And continued through CCD and was an altar boy,
Okay.
was in the youth group and everything.
Okay. And nothing disparaging to either parent, but was your mom more the catalyst for your faith?
Yeah, my mom was born and raised Catholic. My dad was Lutheran.
Okay.
And other denominations as well.
Okay.
But yeah, my mom was the Catholic. My godmother is my grandma, my mom's mom.
Okay.
And my uncle was my godfather, who, when the day I was baptized, Divine Mercy Sunday, was his birthday, April 21st.
How powerful.
Yeah. So I mean,
wow.
It's really interesting how all these things, if you take time to meditate on them and pray about it, it's like, wow, how do all these things fit together?
Exactly. Yeah. So here you are, your parents divorced. How old were you when they divorced?
10, 11 years old.
10 or 11 years old. Probably very impactful on you at that time.
Yeah.
It is, particularly for men. That's a very hard thing to wrap your mind around, and how these parents are going to be estranged from one another.
Right.
Yeah. And so how did that affect your Catholicism at the time?
I think one of the toughest things was we had friends at church and we had friends away from church, and how, especially the friends from church, wouldn't continue to do things with us, and how we were kind of pushed aside.
Pushed to the margins of society.
Yeah. And I guess looking at Matthew 5 and Matthew 25, we have to be there for all people, and so why are we pushing people away?
Yeah. So obviously it affected you negatively about the church.
Yeah.
Were you getting to be angry?
More questioning. How can this really be God's church?
Yeah.
If people are doing this, how can it be
Yeah.
His church?
And that's a good question, because it really goes to the heart of, if we believe as Catholics what we say we believe, then why would we mistreat other people? I mean, even if they fall into hard times like that, we really have to be sensitive to the people in our lives and everything else too. Now, do you have any other siblings?
I have an older sister.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How much older was she?
She's a year older than me.
Okay.
They're
Did it also affect her?
Yeah.
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 So as you're going on this journey away from the church, what are you starting to sense and feel like?
You know, I think it was in my later years when I was in the military. I was married in the Catholic Church, married for a short period of time, and then divorced. But while I was in the military, I got to meet some other people in some other denominations. And I think I saw that warmth that I didn't see in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And it kind of attracted me to what they had, what we were missing.
Kind of that fellowship.
Right.
Let me go back just a little bit though, because I think it's important on your journey. You say you got married in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell? Looking back, did you really see it as sacramental? Did you have a really understanding at that time that you were entering into a sacramental marriage?
And I was just a month over 21, and at that point, I guess I didn't really quite understand. And I think a lot of times it has to do with the time that I grew up in, was after Vatican II, where we were kind of missing some of the teachings and the foundation of the catechism that we have today.
Yeah.
And so I really feel like I knew, but I didn't know.
Okay.
And I guess, looking back, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had an understanding, but not like I have today.
But you didn't have that deep sense of forever.
Right.
Because it really didn't. The mentality of the sacrament really wasn't there.
Right.
Yeah, and that it was so typical of in the 70s and 80s that really and the church was partially responsible for that too, because we really didn't bring our people coming to the altar a really deep and profound understanding of what it means to enter into a sacramental life of the church, particularly in the sacrament of marriage.
Right.
So you get divorced,
Mm-hmm.
you go into the service. Mm-hmm. And are these non-denominationals you're meeting, or are these?
Yeah, non-denominational for the most part. I think one was a Christian Reformed, Baptist. Being in the South in North Carolina at that time, of course, it was a lot of the Southern faiths.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to go through that. Now, I didn't really stay in any one long, and I think that's where I really kind of really stopped going to church altogether, was when I was in the military and after I got back out of the military.
Did you miss it? Looking back, do you think somewhere you kind of suppressed church, but you were missing it?
I think I missed a lot of the social things about the church.
Okay.
And I guess not having a deep sacramental root. I guess I didn't really understand and miss that until I came back into a non-denominational faith. And then that's when I really started to question even more the Catholic faith.
Yeah. During your military service, are we living a Catholic life during that time? And I'm not here. This is not the confessional here.
Right.
But obviously, and listen, I'm as guilty as anybody, because I was lived a life outside of the church for a while myself, and I know that I certainly wasn't very pleasing to God during that time.
Yeah. I think the toughest thing was going through the breakup of my marriage through the last few years of my military time. And I think that was probably a tough time. And at that time, I stopped going to church altogether.
Yeah.
I look back at it now and it's like, okay, what church was that I went to in North Carolina? Oh, Immaculate Conception. I had no idea what that meant.
Yeah.
And so, not even
the names
knowing.
were there, but they had no meaning.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, now you understand that. But so you're during this time that you're starting to really fully drift away from the church, getting out of any type of a weekly mass, any Sunday mass. No longer understanding that we as Catholics are obligated to go to church. It didn't matter.
I would go to church when there was a special event in the family, when somebody got married, or when there was a funeral, or if somebody had a first communion or something, I'd go. But that was about the only time I went. Once, 3 times a year, maybe.
And it really didn't impress you at all at that point either.
No.
So here's Jeff living this life outside of the church, probably outside of God at that time. Then I'm sure you still believed in God.
Yeah, I still believed in Him, but yeah, as far as having a relationship with Him, no.
Yeah, or even relationship with His bride, the church.
No.
Yeah.
No, none.
Didn't matter.
No.
Didn't matter. So what's starting to happen?
It was, I think it was 96. My dad was remarried, and I had a little brother who was like 6 or 7 years old, and so he's a half brother, and he went to Bible camp and got Jesus. I don't know if it was an altar call or whatever, but when he came home, that's one of the things he said to my stepmom and dad, was that he went up and got Jesus. And it wasn't until probably another 3 or 4 weeks that my stepmom started to kind of question what was going on there and the whole bit. And then she got bit by it. And it was the following year, my dad went to Promise Keepers and he got bit. And I still ask my dad today, who are you and what did you do to my father? Because you're not the same guy I grew up with. And it was neat to see the change in him. Yeah.
Isn't that powerful?
Oh my goodness.
When you see someone you dearly love hurting, and yet you see the transformation God can do, it's so joyous.
Yeah.
It's overpowering when that happens.
Yep.
So that must have helped improve. Well, your dad came in. He went to Promise Keepers, and he was convicted.
Yep.
Okay, and so he stays within the church where he's at, right?
Yep.
Which denomination is he now?
He was going non-denominational. Then he went First. The one in Kalamazoo. Kalamazoo First, just like we have here in Grand Rapids.
Congregational?
On 44th Street there, by 44th and...
Oh, yeah, I'll think of that, what that is.
Yeah. He got very involved there, and I said, if you stay involved in that, because you don't do anything long unless you really are convicted. So if you're still doing this next year, I'll go to Promise Keepers with you. And so sure enough, he was still doing it next year, and a completely different person.
So let me understand this. You still don't go back, you're not back at church?
Nope.
But you're telling him that if he stays, that you'll make a commitment to go to Promise Keepers?
Yeah.
So something was working within Jeff.
Well, I think...
Or you were just joyous to see your dad?
I think my mom was also probably praying for me and probably going to confession, because I later talked to my mom about that time period, and she had gone to confession saying she was angry at God because she'd been praying for me to come back in the church. I still wasn't back in church. And so she was told to change her prayer. And she went back 2 weeks later and said, Father, you got to change my penance because I don't know how to change my prayer. And so at that point, the priest started questioning her. Does he have somebody in his life that has a strong relationship with God? And if he doesn't, pray for that person who's not in his life to start affecting that relationship. And it was about that time that my dad was, I was like, wow.
Your dad's starting to have this relationship with God.
Yeah.
And it's starting to affect your relationship.
Yeah. I mean, we'd travel and he's listening to the Bible on tape. It's like, and talking about...
Who is this man?
Yeah, exactly. Talking about stones and stuff or markers. I'm like, what is going on? And it was very interesting to see all that.
You know what's the most powerful? Is your dad was willing to openly witness to you just through his actions.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have to proselytize. We don't have to be evangelizing. We can, just by our very actions, what we do when people are watching us, whether, we're not going to change what we do. Your dad was willing and open to expose himself to who he's become.
Yep.
What a powerful witness to you.
Yeah.
What a powerful witness. So it had to make you start thinking, if he can do this, what is it that's causing this?
Yeah. And it was the following year in '98, I went to Promise Keepers at Silverdome, Hunting Silverdome.
Okay, yep.
And 2 things were built when I was going to the military, the Amway Grand and the Silverdome, and I always knew that I was going there for something special. Why, I didn't know, but okay. And so I did have my special event at the Amway. That was cool. But I hadn't had my special event at the Silverdome. And so I'm there in a whole bit. I'm kind of walking around. Oh, this is a really cool place. And it was there that I went down for an altar call. But I made 3 promises to God. I'm not going to go to church every Sunday. I'm not going to go to church every Sunday. I'm not going to pray every day, and I'm not going to read the Bible every day, and I'm not going back to the Catholic Church. Those are my 3 knots. And it was really funny how a period of 2 years, he untied all those knots and drew me back.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, well, like I said, beginning here, it's really an understanding that as you come into that fear of God, that awe of God, that he begins to infuse us with wisdom. It's when we fully bend our knee to the Lord Jesus that he submits to us and begins to give us that wisdom that we need to see the truth. Right. So your knots were your downfall.
Exactly. You know, the very things you promise you're not going to do are the very things you wind up doing. And it's really funny because those things you see in other people that you're not going to do because they disturb you in some way, you're probably already doing them. Yeah, and exactly. I learned that from a few priests.
I would suggest that you're saying I'm not going to do it was really indication that you were still struggling with many issues within the church,
right,
and not willing to bend that knee yet.
Right.
So God, I'll do anything you ask, but.
Right.
And so that becomes the catalyst for your growth.
Yeah. Well, and then, you know, I probably 2 or 3 months after Promise Keepers, I got involved with a non-denominational church.
Okay.
And they were very mission-oriented, and one of their things would be going down to South and Central America, and especially getting these people that had these prayer beads out of their hand and bringing them to a real relationship with God. And, you know, that's when I really started questioning the Hail Mary, the Holy Mother, because that's a prayer I grew up with.
Right.
Didn't really pray the rosary, but prayed that Hail Mary. And that was the prayer my mom was praying as well. And it's like, how can these people talk bad about the Mother of God? You know, she was, you know, with him his whole entire life.
Yeah.
And the more and more I studied at that time, I came across a great young man who was just a dynamic Catholic. And we had a prayer group that we met with, and a Bible study group we met with after work every Wednesday night. And it was about half Catholic, half Protestant. But there was one young Catholic man who was just on fire. Oh my gosh. Zealous. I mean, and knew his stuff. And he got me praying the rosary, and it wasn't long, and I think it was probably a year, and I found myself back in the church.
Back in the Catholic Church?
Yeah.
This young man was instrumental in starting to open your mind to the truth.
Right.
He was well-formed.
Very, very. And he had a time away from the church himself. He was away from the church for probably, 6 or 8 years.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite that long. But, you know, to hear his story as well when he was away and now he's back.
Yeah.
And,
you know, there was a story, maybe you've heard of Jeff Cavins, who's a Catholic apologist now.
Yes.
He does many tapes. And he was a Catholic, left the Catholic Church, and went to became a non-denominational pastor in a church. And he's well healed and he's well respected in his church. But he said, I'm going by a Catholic church one day. And he says, I look around, he says, I sneak in the back door. I don't want anybody to see I'm going to the Catholic Church. And he says, I have no intentions of doing anything else, but I just want to go back in and see what it's like. He says, I get inside the church, I kneel down, because he's not used to kneeling with it, and he said, I begin to weep profusely because I realized I had left the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And there was Jesus in the Eucharist in the up the tabernacle. And it was so inspiring for him that he went back and left his church and came back to the Catholic Church. But you know, it takes those moments of grace. It takes those moments of that understanding that God is real and present in the church, in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, you know, I think the rosary that has really brought me back. I got involved with a Blue Army group at that time and really started learning more about Our Lady and about the rosary and how it came to be. And also really long for the Eucharist. You know, that's one of the things that Jesus commanded us to do. John 6, you know.
Life discourse.
Right, exactly. And he commands us to do this often in his memory.
Yeah.
Some of these non-denominational churches are doing it every 3 months.
Yeah.
Some are doing it once a month. is this doing it often in my memory?
Well, and not only that, I've had the conversation with some of our great non-Catholic brothers and sisters and say, well, we have communion. And I say, no, no, no. We are a Eucharistic church.
Right.
We're not just a communion church. This is the Eucharist. This is the real presence of Christ, His body and blood, soul and body, body and blood, soul and divinity.
Right.
And so it's this understanding of Jesus leaving us this food for the journey, this manna.
Yeah.
That manna was in the desert.
Just
is
like the
now our
readings the other
Eucharist.
week, yeah.
And so it's a beautiful understanding. But it takes an open heart and mind, eyes of faith to really come to see that.
Yeah.
And that's what you were developing, these eyes of faith.
Yep. Yeah.
Did you struggle with Mary for any length of time?
You know, I never had a deep understanding of her, and I think it helped me to get a deeper understanding of her. Why are these people so against these rosaries? Why are these people so against the mother of Jesus? I mean, she was there his whole entire life, right beside him, and the rosary is nothing more than a meditation on the Gospels,
That's right.
on the life of Jesus.
That's right.
And we're asking Mary to tell us more about her son.
That's right.
You know, they talk about the queen. It's not the queen wife, it's the queen mother.
That's right.
Because these kings had tons of wives and
Yes,
concubines and everything.
exactly.
So it was always the queen mother. If you wanted to learn more about the king, you go to the queen mother. And I was like, wow, I'm getting goosebumps now.
Isn't that wonderful?
It just, I mean, it's amazing how people, well, who was that great bishop?
From where?
Bishop Sheen.
Oh, yes.
Talks about how so many people misunderstand what they think the Catholic Church is because they have no understanding.
Right.
But if they knew, how would they not love it?
That's right.
And so there's all kinds of people out there that have a misunderstanding of what the Catholic Church is because of what other people who might not even be Catholic or fallen away Catholic
Tell 'em.
are saying.
You know, we still the second largest denomination is fallen away Catholic.
Right.
And I always find it intriguing that a Catholic who leaves the church within about 30 days knows everything about the church
Right, right.
when they knew nothing before. And it's really it's a sadness for me because they listen to what people think the church is rather than to coming to an understanding of who the church is.
Right.
And the church is not just an institution. The church is the bride of Christ. Mm-hmm. And once we get into that mystical understanding, what Christ left behind for us, and the sacraments He left behind, it becomes powerful.
Well, and just, you know, I think one of the interesting conversations I had with somebody was about we are the bride of Christ, and so He enters into us. And if you talk about, you know, that understanding of marriage, a man and a woman become one,
Right.
just as we become one with the Eucharist.
That's right.
Jesus enters us, male and female.
That's right.
Well, how can a guy understand that in a sacramental or marriage aspect because he's not the one that,
That's right.
you know, and it's like, wow, how does this all...
Well, and Jesus Himself in Matthew's Gospel calls Himself the bridegroom, which means He is betrothed to us.
Yes.
And John the Baptist was the shushman, the best man who brings the bridegroom to his bride, us.
I never heard that before. That's a
Yes.
good one.
Yeah, and John the Baptist is actually, and that'd be a very Jewish term, that John the Baptist would be known as the shushman. And the shushman never would usurp the glamour or the authority of the bridegroom. So when John says, I become less, he becomes more, he is in the context of being of the best man to Jesus.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's a powerful understanding of the bridegroom coming to us and really wanting to share that relationship, that spousal, covenantal relationship with us within the church. And so we live within that you might say that tension of the physical and the spiritual, in understanding the relationship of Christ to us in this bridegroom. Because God was the first bridegroom to the people of Israel at Mount Sinai.
Yes.
When He formed the covenant with them, and they actually had a wedding. They had, He became the bride, and then Jesus becomes the new bridegroom to us. And so when you're talking about the Eucharist, Jesus becomes the food for the journey.
You're right.
He nourishes His bride.
Yeah.
And it's us.
You know, you talked about Jeff Cavins. That was a guy that I did a little reading on during that time. Also Scott Hahn.
Oh, yes.
And so, I mean, today we have all these teachers and all this material that we didn't have when I was a kid growing
Exactly.
up. And I think that really helps us understand our faith better.
Exactly.
I mean, the same struggle that I was going through in non-denominational churches, they were bringing people away from Mary. Scott Hahn did the same thing with, I think it was his grandmother, when she had passed away, and she no longer has to have these beads, you know.
You know, another thing that's really helped too, and you're part of this, is Catholic television like this.
Yeah.
But people don't hear they didn't hear these conversion stories, and they think they're a lone ranger out there, but it's happened many times. And so they start to say, I can identify with Jeff. I can understand his journey because I had the same struggles. And again, we've got Catholic radio, which allows us to hear the truth and to really be evangelized. We have so much more available at our fingertips, but you still have to respond to the grace to listen to it or watch it.
Right. Holy Family Radio, EWTN.
Yeah. And so you really have to, even watching Catholic Forum, you have to respond to the grace that God is putting into your life. Somebody may be turning on the TV right now and seeing us on here and saying, you know what are these guys going to talk about? And they're going to hear something they hadn't heard before. They're going to hear a person like you witness to what it means to come back into a faithful relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. And that is powerful.
Yeah.
Because it's from the heart. And it wasn't forced upon you.
No, it was something that, and in fact, it wasn't forced upon me. I made these promises to God that I would be closer with you.
Yeah.
But
I'm not going to church.
I'm not going to church every Sunday. And it was really funny because I would go to church if there was 4 Sundays a month. I'd go all 4. If there was 5, I'd miss 1.
Yeah.
And it wasn't long. I found myself going to church every Sunday. I found myself praying every day. I found myself reading the Bible every day. And I was like, wow.
Boy, you became a zealot.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and the thing is, if you look
a
at
Jesus freak.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was my little brother too. He's a Jesus freak as well. And it's so neat to, once you say yes, that you'll enter into a relationship, even though those things you say you won't do, how that's just kind of all stripped away.
Yeah.
And he just draws you closer.
That's right.
And closer. All you have to say is yes.
That's right.
And
it's like a marriage. You go into a marriage with certain expectations of what you won't do.
Right.
But as you fall deeper in love, there's nothing you won't do.
Right. Well, and I think that's the thing about the Catholic Church is we don't just have pieces parts. We have the whole entire thing.
That's right.
And I don't have to take the whole entire thing or understand the whole entire thing, but just those things that really have a deep meaning to me and to help me understand and to help me develop my faith.
Exactly.
Stronger.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of our church is that, like I said, we're all on a journey. We're all learning at different levels. We all absorb it at different levels, and we all come to the Lord in different ways. But the reality of it is we turn to Him in faith, and we know that the fullness of truth lies within that church, and the church will never deceive us.
No.
You've learned that over the course of years, just going on different missionary journeys, that you can really rely on the church's inspiration and its beauty to lead souls to the Lord.
Yeah. Well, in fact, it wasn't shortly after I got back that a friend wanted to learn more about the Catholic Church, invited him to go to the inquiry classes and to RCIA. I was asked to sponsor. I'll tell you what, if you've never sponsored somebody in the Catholic Church, do it.
Yeah,
it's amazing. I sat through probably about a half or maybe a third of the classes.
Wonderful.
And it was so neat just to sit back and watch these people get pulled in and to understand more. Even I learned to understand even more.
Jeff, I want to thank you for being here. The time goes so fast.
Is it over?
It's an inspiring story, and I know that you have responded to God's grace, and it's really been an inspiration to me to see a man who's really taken upon himself the grace to say, I come back to you, Lord, in fullness and faith and in obedience. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I want to thank all of our audience tonight, and as always, for all these beautiful stories we hear, we give all praise to Jesus Christ in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.